Hey guys, welcome to Intro to Drawing and Illustration. So this is one of the most important classes because we're going to be focusing not just on how to draw, but how to see things. So I'm going to start with some terminology. Remembering the terminology is not quite so important as remembering concepts. We're going to start by learning about organic and inorganic shapes. So I'm just going to write organic and inorganic. Organic and inorganic shapes are exactly what they sound like. Organic shapes can be considered any shape that is made in nature. So I've got a carrot and orange. And an inorganic shape is essentially a shape that's made by man. Now, you can have man-made shapes like this is a carved stone, that go in the category of organic. Because when we talk about organic shapes, we're talking about contours. So those are the lines that move as sort of a wave. Whereas with inorganic shapes, and I'm just gonna bring the brightness down on this so you can see what I'm doing. Inorganic shapes are usually made up of angles, so straight lines. So we're gonna start by thinking about straight lines versus curvy lines. That's essentially the basis. And how we approach these might be a little bit different. The first thing to focus on when looking at organic shapes is vision. Now this is going to feel a little bit different if you're drawing along on the screen with me than it will if you're drawing from real life. This is because in order to use this technique in real life, you need to expand your field of vision. So sort of like when you're doing a magic eye, how you sort of allow your eyes to unfocus. If you're using this visualizing technique that I'm about to teach you in real life, you'll want to unfocus your eyes so that you're not paying particular attention only to the subject that you're drawing, but to the area around. This is called sighting. This is when I hold out my pencil, and if it's far away, it's so that this just fits into the vantage point of it. So see how even though it's not lined up with the pencil, it's in the vantage point. And I copy the angle that I'm seeing on the image down to the page. So there I've got one angle, I've got another angle. And you'll notice that even though I'm doing an inorganic shape, sorry, I'm still trying to bring this, yeah, there we go. You can see that contrasted a bit lower. Even though what I'm drawing is inorganic, instead of starting my drawing with curved lines, I'm instead starting with angles. And that's because angles are measurable. Whereas if I create a perfectly contoured line like this, it's a lot more difficult to move this around if I need to. So if it ends up in the wrong place, then I have to start all over again. Whereas angles are simple. I'm just looking at the simple shapes to begin with on the outside of this organic image before working in further details. This is sometimes known as blocking, and this is a technique that's often used when creating a base for a painting or when creating a really accurate work from life. So this is just looking at an object and simplifying its forms into angles. This technique can also be used on inorganic shapes or sort of in the wild. But I want to teach you another way that you can apply to inorganic and even some organic shapes as you begin to learn how to draw and as you practice, just to make realistic forms. So this first technique, looking at angles, is called sighting. And another technique you can use is simply looking for simple shapes. So that means squares, cylinders, and circles, as well as angles, triangles, if you see those. The oval in particular is a really useful one because this can show you how to draw images in perspective if they were inorganic mainly. So an oval is basically a shape, it's an ellipse like this. You'll be familiar with it. And a lot of shapes that you're drawing are going to be made up of ovals. You're going to notice, if you look at this glass, that the top of the oval here moves up, the bottom of the oval here moves down. And by oval, I'm talking about the ring around the top of the glass and the ring formed down. As I move down, this top of the oval moves down below. So if I'm drawing a champagne glass, I can actually apply a formula to it. Because it's symmetrical, I'm going to start by drawing a straight line. Next, I can mark off the midpoint, which is where the glass meets the stem. So I've got that there. And I can also draw an oval for the very top of the glass. Now, it can sometimes be useful to use a cross axis. That's basically when you go like this to begin with, and then you can just focus on each side to make sure they're as even as possible. So I'm going to do that in this case. I'll do a little cross axis here for the oval for the top of the glass. Then here, I know it's a bit difficult to see, but if there was water in this, I'd also have an oval, very narrow one, coming down here. And of course, an oval at the base of my paper, showing where the base is going to be. I'm extending this line here down because one side of the oval is going to be wider than the other because this is in perspective, which we'll learn about later as well. So just making an oval that is wider at the base and a bit narrower at the top. Okay, so now that I've started with this form, I can go down the shape of the glass if I want to add any more sort of evenness to the flute, but I'm just going to use these marks as guides. And there I've got my champagne glass, and you can erase any parts of the oval that you no longer want to use. And this, putting this base drawing down, this is called drafting. And remember that when you're using a pencil, you can erase anything, and that's part of the purpose of using a pencil, is to make marks that you can erase. We've started with drafting by looking for simple shapes within the wine glass. And then we've put in the contours later, once we've mapped out these simple shapes. Let's do the same thing this time with the light bulb. So sometimes shapes are a little bit more square. So for this, instead of drawing everything as ovals to start with, I'm also going to think about describing the base of the light bulb as a rectangle. Now, I'm going to use sighting to determine what portion this little bit, the kind of part that screws in, takes in relation to the rest of the light bulb. So I'm going to do that by counting. I've placed the end of my pencil against the end of this little bit here, and my thumb, or a finger, not my thumb actually, just this finger, against my pencil where the base is. And so I've marked off this little section with the pencil. Now I'm going to count how many times that fits into the light bulb as a whole. So 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 times. You can do this if you're doing this live by holding it out. It just needs to be the same distance from your eyes. So this is, let's say this is 1/5 of the total. That means that if I divide this into 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have a good understanding of proportion, so where this is going to be. Just going to bring down this again. Yes, okay. I'm gonna start my drawing just by doing a rectangle of this shape here. You can also use this siding technique to determine width. So the widest point is about 2.5 times the length of this. Just gonna once more try to bring down the brightness. Okay. Oh, wrong one. Right, okay. So I'm gonna start by doing a rectangle for the base of the light bulb. Then I notice that it sort of moves in here and here. Then the widest point up here is about 1/5 of the way from the top. This is about 2 times, a little bit more than 2 times the length of this base part. So it's like I'm mapping. I'm using one part as a reference for the general sizes of the next. Then also just before the end here, I've got a slightly narrower area. I'm making sure that each side here is equal to the next. This is what this center line is useful for, figuring out like equal distances from one side to the next. You can do that with your pencil or with a ruler. Just gonna mark out when this starts to taper in as well, around here. It starts to taper around here as well as around here. Next, when this goes a little bit up, I'm going to place in the contours. So this is fairly flat at the top. And I'm just connecting the lines as I move down. We tend to think things are more curved than they are. So seeing here how I've kind of curved it, actually this angle should be flat. So it's useful knowing sort of what our instincts are that are wrong when it comes to drawing. And one of those instincts that tends to be wrong is our urge to make things more curved than they actually are. Things are often a lot more straighter than we would think. Okay, so I've got the base of the light bulb down, and now for these spirals, I can use that idea of the oval to view these curved lines coming up in space. So just remember that as we move down, the shape of the oval is going to become different. So it'll either become wider or it'll become flatter, like this here. And I'm going to do something similar around here just to get a sense of the width. And now using this central line as a guide, I can place in any further details. We'll go into shading in just a moment. Whoops, not a great eraser. But, ooh, that's a really bad eraser. Yeah, we'll go into shading, but you can also look for the shapes of the areas that you're going to shade using siding techniques. So holding your pencil out to, for instance, the highlight to see what that's going to look like, any little details, the sort of straight lines of shadow which are going to curve around similar parts with the light bulb. So you're going to get these kind of straight lines of shade lining up on the sides of your markers as well. And shiny shapes like this with glass, you're going to see a lot of kind of vertical lines all over. It'll be a little bit darker to the sides. But the usefulness of techniques like these is that if you want to learn how to draw from your imagination, these will be very useful because you can just apply the concept of simple shapes to just about anything. So a pear, for instance, using a circle and just aligning the top of the pear with the line, you can do that. A clock, we're looking at two ovals from the side. We'll go into more details of this later, but basically in this initial part, we're just learning about sighting, which is when we're using angles and using ovals and straight lines and shapes that we already know to build up objects. And it's up to you which you use, but it makes more sense for inorganic objects with a regular shape like this to use a technique like looking for ovals than it does to try to use that sighting technique on the entire light bulb, because certain points are going to be exactly symmetrical to one another.